One of the things I noticed with spending more time in this show is there's a couple of different visions of the world, right? There's a lot of nature, there's the Sespe River, which plays a big role. Rocks, of course, right? You see, river rocks, rocks, of the landscape. There are two different visions that I'm seeing in your work. One is like looking down, and the other is looking up, right?
Yeah.
Which strikes me as very much an outdoorsman kind of way to look at the world. Can you talk about that, or do you see that in your work?
It's interesting. It's not something that I've thought about a whole lot. As I mentioned earlier, I think about the shifts, more and palette. I might pull a single color out of the landscape and then use that for the entire composition. The larger painting next to it, I was thinking more of, in digging. I do a lot of digging, for irrigation and just planting and different things. I was thinking more of the layers, like the sedimentary layers in this. And, also, I was trying to take advantage of making types of paintings that I just wouldn't really normally, like this isn't something that I would normally make. Mm-hmm. And I think I'd mentioned it, I'd made these three paintings, the larger ones, were underpaintings that I'd made about 2 to 3 years ago that I'd had in the studio that I just wanted to look at and think about. And when this opportunity came up, they seemed like a great thing to use to make paintings that are different for me. So I think maybe what you're recognizing about, the different points of view, it's just, they're not the typical way that I would make paintings. And in some ways it's just without a very deliberate intention. Mm-hmm. As I'd said earlier about not wanting to make, I'm generally thinking of a big singular thing in like a Gustonian way, mm-hmm. Taking even the most mundane, simple thing and exalting it and making it into something that's just grand and epic, even if it's just something that people don't even think anything about. But in this case, I was trying to reverse that and make some paintings that, for me, they could have been like wallpaper, or just like almost nothing in some way, or just some of the most quiet paintings. Like I think of that in particular as just being a painting that, could be the size of that entire wall and just a background. Mm-hmm. But and then walking on the rocks, there's the looking down and paying attention and recognizing certain. And I've got a whole thing of photos of very particular rocks. Rocks within rocks, a lot of fossils.
Because it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
As an American landscape painter, we think of the classic American landscape, whether we're thinking of like Bierstadt or Church or the Hudson River School, or even the California landscape painters or the California Impressionists or landscape photography, right? Like the West is just landscape. Yeah. But your version of the landscape is like an experiential version, right? You look at your feet as you're hiking. You analyze the ground as you're...
Yeah, when I would hike, and spend sometimes a month in the wilderness alone just walking, people would say, what are you thinking about? Like if you have all that quiet time alone, what are you thinking about? I said, there may be days of just nothing. Mm-hmm. And you're not talking to anybody, so it's just absolute quietude. And it's a very peaceful, meditative thing. And that's a lot of what goes on in my days just at home, and what I'm doing if I'm not in the studio is just out in a very quiet place. It's just birds, bugs are loud because there's just no noise pollution. And it's very quiet, but trying to make a different type. Historically, as you mentioned, all of that and Dove and all these people I think are super interesting, but I don't see any of that as being something that's been exhausted. Mm-hmm. Or like the little paintings. Somebody had mentioned Munch, because he had made a lot of these smaller paintings. I think that all of that is an interesting place to step off, but hopefully make something that looks a little different. That's not a typical looking, a painting that somebody hadn't seen before.
Mm-hmm. One question I have for you is, we're at Mount San Jacinto College, a community college art gallery, and part of our mission statement is we're a teaching gallery, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, this is the first time our students will have ever been to an art gallery or engaged in contemporary art or a living artist or seen paintings in person. One thing that you might want to, or one thing that I point out to my students is you're working in series, right?
Yeah.
And the importance for artists to work in series. And can you talk about that? Why you chose to work in series, or why there's some?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't done that historically. You know, it was something that I recognized when I went to school was being taught and talked about quite a bit. And we go to museums, we go to galleries. You can recognize even a Picasso, as much as he's changed through all the different periods that he'd worked through. It's still very legible and obvious when you come across his work, or most artists' work. I wanted to, even at that point, do something that was entirely different and tried to put emphasis in making paintings that were very singular and not paintings that were repetitive. Until this last June, my mom had died, and I told John I was just entirely derailed creatively and didn't know what to do, and was just on this little loop of, you know, like when those kinds of things happen, it's the why, and then over time the orbit gets a little bit bigger, and you know you get a little more distance on the situation. But because I paint every day, but didn't really know what to paint, I just spent a lot of time sitting in the river on the rocks, just listening to the river and just sitting next to it, thinking about things, and thought, I can just paint this river every day. So strangely, at 61, it's the first time that I had made work in that fashion, which I've really enjoyed. It's been a great experience to do that. I'm just slow. It took me a while to get there.